Like Grains of Sand in the Hourglass by Temporal Night. Read by Rainbow. Chapter 3. The Butterfly Flaps. Dora marched down the 7th floor corridor with Harry and Hermione practically jogging to keep up with her. She drafted Hermione to be the rear guard in case Harry decided Umbridge's torture wasn't worth going to a teacher over. Not that she actually thought he'd run away once they got him to agree, but in the immortal words of her scarred mentor, "It's always better to be safe than sorry. Never forget Rule 3, because it'll kill you." Dora's hands may not have been clenched, and her teeth may not have been grinding together, but her mindset was plain to see for anyone who knew metamorphs. Her hair was a dark red, not the fun fire engine red. No, this was deep crimson, a fiery blood red shade. She was still set on avoiding the slippery slope of killing everyone who stood between her and a happier future. But Dora silently started praying that McGonagall would be able to handle things enough to let her rage cool off. Again, better safe than sorry. Dora?" Hermione murmured as they rounded another corner. "I know this may not be the most appropriate time, but, well, your hair. Do you by chance have Metamorphmagus traits?" Dora cursed under her breath, and her lips twisted into a small scowl. Perfect. 3 days in, and Hermione Granger finds out about the metamorph thing. She was supposed to get to know the new me first, and now she's going to get suspicious. Stupid bloody hair? Yeah, trained myself. Harry already mentioned you had a friend with a talent too. Small world, huh? It certainly seems that way sometimes, Hermione replied, trailing off as Pansy Parkinson and Malfoy came into view around the next bend. "Oh ho! Look what we have here, Pansy," Draco drawled as a large grin spread across his face. "Gryffindor is out of bed after curfew. I think that'll be 50 points each, and detentions with—" "Fuck off, Malfoy," Dora snarled as she shoved past him. She didn't actually touch him, but let loose just enough of a wandless spell with her gesture to send him into the corridor wall with a soft, fleshy slap reverberating out. By pleasant coincidence, a rolling tapping evidenced his wand bouncing happily away down the corridor as it escaped from his clutches. "We're with a prefect, and going to see our head of house, which is allowed by school rules. Plus your patrol doesn't start for another hour or so get back to your broom closet before I send McGonagall after you." Without even deigning to glance in his direction, or waiting for a reply, Dora kept marching forward, hearing the pounding of feet as Harry and Hermione caught back up. "I'm gonna have to start taking notes from you," Harry said with a quiet chuckle as McGonagall's office finally came into view. "That's twice you shut him down without even trying." "You let him get to you. That's what your problem is, Harry. Either ignore bullies entirely, force their own medicine down their throat, scare the shit out of them, or piss them off enough that they get too confused to keep going after you," Dora muttered. "Too much Tonks, not enough Dora." "Sod it!" Dora could have had a bully problem too. She pulled up outside the head's door and took a careful breath to center herself before politely knocking. The students only had to wait a few moments before McGonagall opened the door and narrowed her eyes as she caught sight of just who it was. "Already?" she asked warily. "Normally, I expect these sort of meetings after about a month, not the first Monday of term. Come in." The teacher stepped to the side with a sigh and beckoned the trio in. Dora took a seat in front of McGonagall's desk, while Harry plopped down beside her and Hermione took the far seat. Once they had arranged themselves, the Gryffindor head set down a trio of teacups and a plate of biscuits before taking her own seat and folding her hands around a cup of her own. "Please drink. If the prior years are any guide, I expect this conversation requiring a bit of tea. I do admit, I'm slightly surprised to see Mr. Weasley replaced by Miss Kirk." Dora snorted, while Hermione's eyes widened and she sat up straighter in shock. Harry blushed and shrugged. "Yeah, well, Dora was kind of the reason we're here, Professor. I said we should have just left it alone and that I could deal with it." "No!" Hermione said, turning to him with a scowl before she glanced down at the bandage around his hand, and her face fell, her eyes blinking harshly and her mouth quivering as she reached over and gently laid a hand on his arm. "You are not letting her get away with this, Harry. Dora's eye twitched enough, even her powers weren't enough to get it under control. Instead, she opted to ignore the tick and leaned forward, laying her hands on her knees in an effort to keep them from shattering the chair by squeezing too hard. Professor McGonagall, I was led to believe that if we had any issues, we could come to speak with you about it. We have an issue. A large one. Harry just left a 3-hour detention with Umbridge. Miss Kirk, I know that you are new to Hogwarts, but detentions are not something that necessitates a visit to your head of house, McGonagall said with a raised eyebrow. The teacher turned to Hermione, obviously waiting for a slightly more in-depth explanation. Hermione closed her eyes and sat up straighter, folding her hands into her lap before nodding. Harry, show her your hand. He stayed still enough that without the rising and falling of his chest, one would have been forgiven for thinking he might be sleeping. Or dead. Harry, please show Professor McGonagall your hand. We can't help you if you keep us all out. Harry stared at the floor, scowling, and didn't move. Dora reached over and gently squeezed his thigh, smiling at him as he looked up and met her eyes, followed by Hermione's. Sighing, Harry unwrapped the gauze she'd conjured for him and held out his revealed injury towards McGonagall. The Scot frowned as she leaned over the desk and peered at his hand. After a moment, her eyes widened and she sat back with a gasp. With trembling hands, McGonagall reached out and grasped her teacup, taking a long sip while she regained her composure. Finally, setting her mug back down, McGonagall nodded. Just to ensure I understand the situation correctly, Madame Umbridge had you, Mr. Potter, writing lines for 3 hours using a blood quill. She didn't say that's what it was, but that was what Dora said when she saw it too, so I guess so, Harry said, drawing his hand back into his lap. Please describe the quill, Mr. Potter. It was black, he said, shrugging. It didn't use ink. It pricked the back of my hand whenever I wrote with it, and the ink looked like my blood. Every half hour or so, Umbridge would stop me and check the back of my hand. When she finally let me go, she said, it looked like the message had sunk in for the moment. McGonagall took a deep breath and drained her cup. Dora didn't know if Harry or Hermione caught it, but she certainly recognized the moment. McGonagall was pushing down her rage and trying to quell the urge to rip and tear into someone. The hand shaking and the grim set around the eyes was the key distinction between rage and fear. Every Auror learned fast to tell the difference. Hazard of the job. McGonagall eventually got herself under control and set her cup to the side, folding her hands on the desk, though Dora didn't miss how her eyes lingered on the cabinet with the fire whiskey. That is how a blood quill works, Mr. Potter. You weren't originally intending to bring this to my attention? Harry shrugged. She's doing this because I'm speaking out that Voldemort is back. She's not going to stop. I already have detention through Friday with her, and the woman is specifically making it so I miss the Quidditch tryouts. This is between her and me. He paused for a moment before sighing and continuing. Also, Professor, in the past when I've come to you with things, you haven't done very much, so I didn't see the point in this trip. You've never overturned any of the biased decisions Snape makes. You ignored us with the Philosopher's Stone. You brushed us off with the Basilisk. You didn't do anything last year with the tournament. Harry trailed off, staring morosely at the floor. Hermione had paled as Harry started speaking, and by the end, she was wringing her hands while looking anywhere but at their teacher. Dora had to take several deep breaths at the list of transgressions. We didn't miss a single year of hell. We missed every year of hell. Merlin, how am I supposed to give him a good year when I seem to be the only one picking up on everything that's gone wrong? It's Harry Potter. How could we all have been this blind? McGonagall's fingers clenched around each other hard enough for the knuckles to briefly turn white. Dora almost mistook it for anger at Harry until she noticed that the older woman's eyes were fixed firmly on her own fingers. McGonagall wasn't angry at Harry. She was angry at herself. Guilt, yet another common expression on Dora's old partners. It was several long moments before she managed to respond. Mr. Potter, While my past performance may have been lacking to a degree, I am ashamed as both a teacher and a head of house that you did not feel something of this magnitude could be brought to my attention. The head of house's primary job is to ensure the safety of their students. That you no longer feel I can do that. Harry shrugged, still refusing to look up. Dora carefully folded her arms and leaned back. She waited until McGonagall met her gaze before speaking. Perhaps you can start making up for that now, Professor. Are we safe in assuming that Umbridge will be gone before classes start tomorrow morning? McGonagall pushed back from the desk, turning to her window for nearly a minute as she gazed out among the grounds as if searching for a different answer than the one she had. She slowly shook her head before turning back to face the trio. I am sorry, Mr. Potter, but I cannot remove Madame Umbridge from her position. Dora's nails dug into her palms hard enough to pierce the skin, and she gnashed her teeth loud enough that she almost missed McGonagall's reasoning. Unfortunately, the woman has been appointed by our esteemed minister, and it is not in my power, or the headmaster's, to dismiss her. So call the bloody DMLE and arrest her, Dora shouted, her hair darkening further before she clamped her mouth shut again. She'd barely cut off before Harry reached over and gently squeezed her hand. It's okay, Dora. I'm used to this. Every year the defense teacher is evil and has it out for me specifically. We only missed 1 year, and from a certain point of view, even Remus tried to kill me, so technically, he counts too. This is par for the course in my life. It shouldn't be, she cursed. Hermione violently shook her head before shouting, Harry, you shouldn't have to deal with this year after year after year. We cannot let this pass without any form of repercussion anymore. It's just going to keep happening, and it's going to get worse like it always does, and someone is going to try and kill you. Again! Tears welled up in her eyes, and Harry gently pulled her head down to his chest as he awkwardly pat her back. Hermione, it's okay, really. This isn't anything new. I've dealt with it before, and I can do it again. Umbridge has nothing on Faux Moody. McGonagall sighed and grimaced as she looked to Dora. Miss Kirk, perhaps your guardians did not bring this up much in the coven, but Minister Fudge has many friends in many positions. I have the utmost respect for Amelia Bones. Unfortunately, with the current climate, even she would not be able to keep Madame Umbridge imprisoned for longer than a day or two at maximum. The reprisals that would come down from the minister upon both the DMLE and Hogwarts should we try would likely end up being worse than if we do nothing. McGonagall looked to Harry with a heavy frown etched onto her features. I am sorry that you are yet again at the center of things, Mr. Potter. I am sorry that yet again I must disappoint you. I may not be able to lock away Umbridge, but I can at least ensure that she is unable to target you or cause further injuries. Report to my office tomorrow for a single detention. All further ones this week are cancelled, though I recommend you come here all the same in order to keep up the illusion long enough for Umbridge to not realize you can attend the tryouts again. Harry shrugged. Sure. It's more than I expected. Thank you, Professor. Have a pleasant evening. He stood and gently tugged Dora to her feet as well. Hermione jumped up a moment later to follow them both as he moved towards the door. McGonagall held up a hand, and Dora turned back, trying and failing not to glare. Mr. Potter, if you stop by the hospital wing, Madame Pomfrey will be able to give you Murtlap Essence. It will ease the stinging and prevent the development of scars. I was going to recommend that myself, Professor, Hermione murmured, following the others outside. As the door shut, Harry took Dora's hand and started leading the way down to the hospital wing. Hermione blinked at him and cocked her head to the side. Wait, you're not fighting going to see Madame Pomfrey? Her eyes narrowed as she glanced momentarily to Dora before settling back on Harry. You always avoid her domain whenever I try to suggest it. Harry chuckled and shook his head. I don't always avoid the hospital wing, Hermione. Generally, yes. But my hand does hurt. He paused long enough for Dora to frown as she caught a blush spread on his cheeks. And Dora should probably get her palms looked at. Hermione frowned and glanced down while Dora's eyes widened, and she turned her hands over to stare at her palms. The thin trails of blood had her drawing in a sharp breath. I didn't even realize I was doing that. I'm not the only one who needs to loosen up, apparently, Dora. He smirked at her and turned back to keep heading forward. Dora dropped back into step with Hermione. The brunette cast a small, watery smile in Dora's direction. Welcome to being friends with Harry Potter. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Dora found Fred and George Weasley bouncing down the stairs from the boys' side of the dorm. She smiled predatorily and stood up from her spot where she had been sitting vigil on the couch, unfolding her arms as she beckoned them towards a corner of the common room. Frowning slightly, both nonetheless followed her. Dora leaned casually against the wall, using her new perch to survey the room. It was empty enough. Hermione had paused her morning review to glance their way, and Neville was sitting in the armchair nearby. Other than that, the only people in the area were far enough to be outside hearing range of a quiet conversation. That worked. She didn't need this to be entirely cloak and dagger, but she wasn't about to begin advertisements until the battle had been joined in earnest. You two are the primary pranksters in the school, yeah? She asked. Fred smirked and nodded. That we are, Kirk. Are you hoping to contract our services? One of the boys trying to get a bit too close, a bit too quick? George picked up the thread with a wink. Word of warning. We consider Ron fair game, but we won't touch Harry unless he's done something particularly naughty. Dora rolled her eyes in response and had to bite her tongue to avoid saying a fun rejoinder that was not at all appropriate for a 15-year-old girl to utter. I'm not looking for payback on unwanted suitors, but I'll keep that in mind for the future. What I am hoping for is an assistance in declaring war. Umbridge is in the business of torturing students. Snape is an ass, but he doesn't actively hurt people from what I've seen so far. She does. McGonagall and the school can't do anything about her, so I will, and I want your help. Fred narrowed his eyes and quirked his mouth for several moments before responding. We're not friends of her either, but war sounds extreme, and we tend to try and keep things below the extreme line. Bloodquill, Dora said, arching an eyebrow. She had to flex her power to keep her hair from switching away from the yellow she'd chosen for the morning. She uses blood quills during detention. If Hermione and I hadn't pushed him to tell us last night, Harry would probably be permanently scarred by the end of the week. Hermione stood then and walked over with a sigh. She's right. For what it's worth, I agree. If the staff is unable to take action against such abuse, perhaps other avenues are more appropriate. The book in Neville's lap clattered to the floor with a loud bang, and the blushing boy quickly picked it up and dropped it on the couch. He glanced to the floor and grimaced at their questioning gazes. Sorry, wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but that history lesson was a bit dry. Hermione, you're actually okay with pranking a teacher? This teacher, Hermione corrected primly. Dolores Umbridge should not be around children. I am concerned what the younger years will have to deal with around her. My initial excursions into magic were bad, and my teachers were perfectly acceptable and did not torture us during class or in detentions. She paused for a moment and continued to mutter. Even if one of them turned out to be possessed, he was always just a stuttering wreck in the class environment at least. Dora blinked at that and quickly ran through a list of teachers that description would apply to. Quirrell? The one who died at the end of... Oh, holy hellfire. What else has Dumbledore kept from us? What Hermione is skirting is that Umbridge is evil, Dora said, shaking her head and clamping down on all her bubbling feelings. I want the bitch gone. I want her tearing her hair out by the end of the week and running from the grounds in terror by the end of the month. George slowly nodded. We can do that. We'll have to start slow, though. Ramp things up methodically. We should get Peeves involved, Neville said. Dora and the twins turned to goggle at him, while the noise Hermione made would have sent Crookshanks running from the room. What? Peeves is probably the longest-running prankster in the castle. He'll be willing to help if we phrase it right. I was in that class, too. She was purposely baiting all of us, and Harry was just the first to respond. She would have done it to any of us if we had yelled before him. The woman is evil. That's also completely disregarding how between her and Fudge, Voldemort is going to end up running the country by the end of the year. If we're going to get her to run for the hills, then count me in. Well said, mate. Fred clapped Neville on the back and grinned. Well said indeed. Now, we just need some ideas for how to start. How about every quill she picks up runs dry? Hermione asked. Dora raised her eyebrows at the brunette. That's not exactly a big deal, Hermione. No, think about it. Think how utterly frustrating it would be. We'd have to charm her hands instead of the quills, that way she couldn't even borrow a quill. She wouldn't be able to write any letters or grade any papers. It's also karmically appropriate, considering this is in response to the use of a blood quill, so she'd understand exactly why we're doing this. Fred and George both nodded. George smiled at the girl and took out a piece of paper to write some notes. It's good. Don't underestimate the effectiveness of minor annoyances over long periods of time. She's fond of pink, right? Fred asked. How about we lighten her skin a bit while we're at it? Maybe to a bit more of a girly tone? Pink skin and the loss of writing is an okay start, Dora said as a large smirk crossed her face. But I think something a bit more personal is needed as well. Like what? Neville asked. Oh, nothing too bad just yet. I'm just thinking that if she can't find her door because it looks just like the surrounding stone, well, that bitch is a bit too proud to sleep anywhere but her own room. I'm curious to see just how long before she cracks and begs one of the other staff for help finding her bed. The twins laughed, Neville chuckled, and even Hermione gave a small smile. I like this plan, George commented, wrapping an arm around Dora. You show promise, Dora Kirk. The bitch offensive starts this morning. Hey, you got a few minutes? Dora asked the fourth-year blonde as dinner let out. Luna turned and smiled as she saw the metamorph. The way her eyes focused just past Dora, coupled with a slight tilt in her head and too wide grin, left Dora distinctly uncomfortable and slightly unnerved. Yeah, and the fact that she knows there are two of you has absolutely nothing to do with that, she thought. Sighing, Dora continued, We need to talk for a bit. Certainly, Luna said, nodding quickly. I was hoping to be able to interview you before the next edition. Daddy has complained that the Quibbler doesn't have enough intriguing articles for next month, especially since our expedition to find the Crumplehorn Snortcack was unsuccessful. Dora groaned and wiped a hand across her face. See? That right there is one of the things we have to talk about. Come on, there's a room I can safely ward this way. The blonde skipped along happily in Dora's wake, either ignoring or oblivious to Dora's discomfort. Both girls entered the classroom, and Dora swiftly set up her brand of privacy wards, spell combinations that actually managed to make Moody smile once upon a time. Rule 17. Always assume someone is listening. Always. Hopping up onto the professor's desk at the front, Dora waited for Luna to take a seat in one of the students' spots. The blonde sat with a large smile and doe eyes, causing an internal groan from Dora. How am I supposed to threaten or yell when she looks at me like that? Not that I plan on things going that way as it is, but still, it's nice to have the option to yell if needed. Stupid, innocent eyes. Luna, on the train you mentioned that there were two of me. Can you explain a bit about what you meant with that? Of course, Luna said, nodding. I meant that the Hufflepinks surrounding you show that you had a double nearby. Or that you are the double. It is sometimes difficult to determine exactly what the Hufflepinks are expressing. She frowned and furrowed her brow as she tilted her head to the side and stared at Dora. After an uncomfortable 30 seconds, Luna shrugged and leaned back. They are quite faint now. It could mean that your double is quite far, or it could be that you and she have begun to split your combined path. I won't know for certain until the blibbering humdingers start to circle you. That's always an excellent sign that a preordained road has taken a turn through the bushes. Dora struggled to keep her hair under control while she sorted through exactly what Luna was saying. So, what do you think about me? Or I guess the better question is, who do you think I am? Luna's mouth twisted into a thoughtful expression, and she started to rub her chin. It's hard to say. Normally these things are very difficult to determine. However, I do remember seeing a strong concentration of Hufflepinks flying near an R on the platform before we left London. She had pink hair. I believe Daddy has mentioned her name as Tonks. Yes, it was Tonks. I believe you may be a doppelganger of our Tonks. Dora felt color draining from her face, despite flexing her control. Luna just grinned widely and nodded emphatically. Do you remember perhaps walking into a fairy circle? You could have lost quite a bit of time that way, and yet the fair folk may have returned you to a different time than when you left, meaning your older counterpart could be walking around under a new identity. Or perhaps our Tonks had an accident with a backfiring spell. Mother was working on new forms of spells and rituals as part of her job. One had an adverse reaction and it killed her. Luna paused and closed her eyes, visibly suppressing a small shudder. Dora tried to ignore her own rising panic to try and comfort the young blonde, but before she could say anything, Luna had opened her eyes again and her smile was restored. I'm sorry. Mother passed quite some time ago. I didn't start to see the Hufflepinks or the Blibbering Humdingers until after that event. I believe there might be a correlation, but it's not really important. The key is that our Tonks could have been involved in a similar circumstance that resulted in a different outcome. Perhaps your mind was erased in the process, and you filled in the blanks with what was available? I can ask Daddy if I can borrow one of the Plimpkin detectors to check. Dora opened her mouth to respond and shut it after a moment when drawing a blank. She tried again and again came up speechless. Finally, she sighed and leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, staring intently at the blonde. Luna, can I trust you to keep a secret? Of course, Dora. I don't have many friends to tell it to anyways. She paused and shrugged. Actually, since Ginny tends to stay with the Gryffindors while in school, I doubt I would have anyone to tell. You are the only one I would gossip with. Or Harry, possibly. He was very nice to me on the train and at dinner the other day. I doubt he'd enjoy gossip, though, considering how his previous years have progressed. Dora frowned at that before shaking her head. Okay, we'll address your social life later. Right now, I need to focus on this Hufflepink thing. Luna, I'm swinging in the breeze here. You know enough to be dangerous, but on the other hand, you know enough to be a great friend, something that I badly need right now. You're also obviously incredibly smart. I am a Ravenclaw, Luna said, smiling guilelessly. True, but I was talking more about your deduction skills. Dora gathered herself and took a deep breath. Luna, what if I told you you'd hit on the right answer? If this doesn't go well, I can always obliviate her. I really don't want to do that, though. Well, I'd want to interview you even more, Luna said. She shrugged and sighed. You seem very interested in privacy and secrecy, though, so I doubt that will be happening. I would still like to learn the specifics, though. It's also very intriguing. Luna. Dora paused to set her resolve and jumped into her leap of faith. Something did happen to our Tonks. This year. It went very badly. It was horrible enough that by the end of the year, Harry and several of his friends wound up raiding the Department of Mysteries. Luna cocked her head to the side and her eyes widened slightly. That doesn't sound like a very good idea. Many things in that department are supposed to be quite dangerous. Yeah, tell me about it, Dora muttered. I don't know all the specifics, but I can tell you that Harry thought he was trying to save his godfather. Tonks and several of her friends hurried to the ministry to try and help Harry. Unfortunately, they were too late. There were some deaths, and when Tonks tried to save Harry from Bellatrix Lestrange, something in the time room had a bad reaction to a spell. Dora grimaced and leaned back, spreading her arms wide. I landed here a few days ago, changed my name, changed my face, and I'm doing the best I can to try and change the rest of the bullshit that has happened this year that leads us to death and destruction. That's why I can't let you officially interview me, or say anything to anyone else about me being different or weird. My cover is weak enough that anyone actually looking would see through it, and then Harry would still end up storming the ministry. I can't let that happen. I won't. Luna frowned and cocked her head to the other side once Dora's rant was over. Her eyes roamed over the metamorph, and Dora felt as if she was being sized up by the little blonde. She resisted the urge to control her red cheeks or her slight panting breaths. She wasn't going to hide how upset thinking about the events the DOM were making her. I would like to help if I can, Luna finally said softly. I'm not incredibly knowledgeable regarding spells, but I am quick, and I learn fast. Dora blinked and stared at Luna. Okay, not what I was expecting there. Apparently, I've been drafted into a study group by Hermione already. I'll see about expanding it to multiple houses and discussing some more advanced spells. Until we get rid of Umbitch, we certainly won't be learning decent defense tactics, and my aura background should help somewhat as long as I can keep it realistic to what a teenager should know. Luna, you don't have to jump into this with both feet, you know. I'm mostly just looking to vent since I can't exactly go to Harry with this. I just need you to stay quiet about my origins and let me rant every once in a while. You were kind to me when you didn't have to be. Harry reassured me when he had just barely met me. I would like to repay your kindness with my own, Luna stated wistfully. Dora's heart about broke at that. Reading between the lines, it wasn't difficult to see why the young girl had ended up in the DOM with Harry and the others. Thanks, Luna. I promise. I will do everything I can to make sure you don't regret this. Before we leave, do you mind if I check your occlumency skills? I imagine your father taught you the basics already, but I'd rather be sure myself. Luna smiled and chuckled. You can certainly try. Daddy tried to teach me after Mother died, but he gave up quite quickly. Dora frowned before shrugging, leaning down enough to peer into Luna's eyes. She took out her wand and gently pointed it in the girl's direction. Well, let's see how good you are then. Legilimens. Most people's memories were simple to navigate. Without occlumency, a skilled legilimencer could wander through their target's mind with relative ease. The intruder could flit from memory to memory in moments, searching out the important information and avoiding all the chaff in the way. Luna's mind was anything but simple. Instead of a slideshow of memories and distinct roads between them, Dora found herself in a kaleidoscope. Fractured scenes split in half and merged with other half-remembered fragments before curving off and skipping into a merry dance around a completely separate and seemingly unrelated moment. No matter where Dora turned, the memories flitted and changed from moment to moment, leaving her head hurting and feeling like she was wandering through a labyrinth filled with spikes and pitfalls. Hurriedly, she pulled back out and rubbed her temples. Ow! Now I see why your dad stopped. Talk about natural defenses. How the heck can you function thinking like that? Luna shrugged. It is difficult to maintain focus at times, but generally it makes everything quite entertaining. I have no issues remembering things, and I honestly don't quite understand why people have so many difficulties navigating my internal mindscape. I don't question it though, as it makes things far simpler in many aspects. Yeah, well, whatever works for you. Dora hopped off the desk and hesitated a bare moment before pulling Luna up from her desk and hugging the girl for a few seconds, then stepping back with a smile on her face. Thanks for listening, Luna. And thanks for keeping quiet about all this. Of course, Dora. Luna paused and glanced to the floor before asking softly. Are we friends now? Yes, Luna. We're friends. Dora responded, gently letting her hair change to pink. You need me for anything. Feel free to come calling. and you can hang out with us whenever you want." The beaming smile and nod from the younger blonde set Dora's mind at ease. If nothing else, at least she'd have been able to brighten one person's life throughout all this mess. Turning to leave, she dropped the wards around the room and had her hand on the door before Luna called out one final remark. "Dora, I don't know if you considered it yet, but the Hufflepinks might have diminished because you and she are no longer the same as you once were. Even the few days you've been here must have left a large impression. If you don't truly consider yourself her, the Hufflepinks may have lost interest." "I'm not sure whether that's correct, Luna," Dora responded slowly, clamping down on a rush of conflicting emotions that almost set her hair into a rainbow. "But I'll keep that in mind." Turning the doorknob, she walked out and went to go find her wayward Gryffindors. Friday afternoon saw the arrival of Quidditch tryouts for the Gryffindor team. Dora ended up ignoring her reservations and trying out. After all, it was a good stress relief and a perfect method to stay close to Harry. And that was all. Yep, that was it. No ulterior motive, none whatsoever. "I seriously need to start working out again soon," Dora thought to herself with a slight scowl as she stepped off the broom and studiously avoided watching the way Harry's shirt was clinging to his abs. A good series of exhaustion runs will clear this nasty little attraction right up. Can't be attracted to someone if you're too exhausted to do more than concentrate on walking. She nearly laughed out loud at the thought of Dora Kirk not concentrating on walking. The day that happened would probably be the day she died. "All right, Harry with me. Everyone else, talk amongst yourselves," Angelina called out, clapping her hands together and smiling. Harry flashed a small grin and thumbs up to Dora and Ron as he hurried over to their captain. "You were so much better than me," Ron mumbled glumly, kicking at the dirt. "Did the Coven have a team you played on?" Dora shrugged. "Nah, I just have good reflexes and always love to fly. It's a good combination. I generally play chaser, but with those girls flying together for years, there's no way I'd be good enough to muscle to a spot." "Well, you beat me." "Ron," Dora sighed and turned to face him fully. "You have major confidence issues. You're actually better than I am at Keeper. The things you saved I would have never managed. You let one or two taunts from the Watchers get to you, though, and suddenly you crumbled like a sandcastle in the tide. Why do you care what others think or say?" Rule 50. Ignore everyone but your own inner voice. If he can live with your actions, so can you. Damn the rest. Ron shrugged. "I don't." Dora glared at him and raised an eyebrow while crossing her arms and tapping her fingers in a foot. It only took a few seconds before he caved. "I don't know, right? I've always cared about what everyone else thinks. It just matters to me." "I guess you'll never be on the cannons then," Dora commented offhandedly. She turned back to face Harry and started a silent count. She'd made it to 3 before Ron jumped in front of her with a scowl etched deep in his features and a red spreading across his cheeks and ears. "What do you mean I'll never be on the cannons? What the bloody hell does caring about how people see me have to do with Quidditch?" Dora's lip twitched as the fly was snared into her web. "Only everything?" At Ron's blank look, Dora heaved a heavy sigh and shook her head. She pointed back up towards the goals and shrugged. "They last won a game about 40 years ago. 42, according to the official records, unless you count that exhibition game where Barton knocked himself out and fell in the snitch on his way down. Yet every year they keep playing and keep their spirits up. Every year those guys get right back on the broom with a huge smile and have a grand time playing the game. Everyone badmouths them for their record, but they don't care. They enjoy the game, and that's enough for them. If you care more about what people think than simply doing what you want to do, well, you'll never make it to the cannons." Ron frowned and looked back at the stands, then the goals before rubbing his chin. "You may have a point there. I'm going to have to think about that." "Think about what, Ron?" Harry asked as he walked over. "Nothing, Harry. It's just a bit of stuff to chew on." Dora resisted the urge to high-five herself. Ron could be matured. She just needed to keep finding the right way to relate it to his world. "Gather round, troops. Angelina called out, waving the wandering hopefuls in. As they all gathered, she nodded to each. Thank you everyone for your interest. We're going to have a reserve for each position this year in case of injuries. If you haven't made the primary team or the reserves, then don't give up. Keep practicing. Keep your chin up and come back next year. Or this year if it turns out that we need more reserves. Anyway, here's the decision. She stopped for a brief moment to ensure that everyone was listening and nodded again. Harry is obviously Seeker. His reserve is Ginny. The Chasers will again be me, Alicia, and Katie. Reserve for this position is Dimzella. Dimzella, you did great. You just need a bit of work flying with a team. Beaters again are Fred and George. Reserve for Beater is Faye. Again, well done. You just weren't quite as harmonious as the twins. Keeper is Dora, with the reserve is Ron. What? Cormac McLaggen shouted, throwing his gloves to the ground. Kirk? Weasley? What the hell? I saved 3 more than Weasley, and I flew rings around Kirk. Dora snorted and raised her eyebrows. When was this? Was it while you were distracted by trying to flirt with Katie? Or while you were shouting at Colin that he needed to pull his arms forward more when he hit the bludger? That was Faye, by the way. Oh, he was shouting at me? Faye asked with a chuckle. I know I keep my hair up when I play, but I think you need your eyes checked if I look like a guy to you, McLaggen. Cormac, if you had managed to keep your mouth shut or your opinions to yourself, maybe you could have beaten out Ron, Angelina said with a sigh. As it is, though, you're arrogant, disruptive, and you mess with the team dynamics. Curb the attitude, and maybe you'll have better luck next year. McLaggen scowled deeper and stormed off, muttering. Angelina rolled her eyes and turned back to the group. To those of you who made the team, congratulations. You'll see the practice schedule up shortly. To everyone else, you all put forth a great effort, and I hope you try out again next time. Well done, everyone. As the group split off, Ron waved goodbye to Harry and Dora and headed back towards the showers. He didn't look happy, but Dora took heart in the fact that his shoulders weren't slumped like earlier, and he seemed to be walking with a purpose instead of shuffling. Harry frowned and stared after the redhead. I kind of expected him to be a bit more upset. I talked to him, Dora commented. I don't know if the epiphany will stick or not, but he should be looking at Quidditch at least with a bit better perspective. Maybe. I hope. Maybe I should ask Merlin and Morgana for some help. Dora grinned at Harry, winking, and he couldn't help but laugh at her joke. They were still chuckling as Umbridge waddled onto the field with a sickly, sweet smile on her face. Dora's eyes lit on the toad, and it was all she could do to avoid scowling and cursing the Ministry bigot. Their pranks had left some evidence of frustration, and the sleep deprivation was already showing in the circles under the bitch's eyes. Her pink skin contrasted nicely with the strong smell of dung bomb hanging permanently around the woman. Peeves' contribution to the war efforts was simple and consistent with the poltergeist. But in this circumstance it was proving effective to a degree. Mr. Potter, the bitch said in her high-pitched whine, you are skipping a detention. Such a naughty young man. I do believe I am forced to see you in my office yet again, tonight at... You obviously haven't checked the rulebooks, Madam Umbridge, Professor McGonagall said as she walked out from the stands. Dora let her mouth lift in a small smirk at the sight of the head of house. Mr. Potter's detention ended already. He had far more than enough time to come and attend tryouts. The smug look on the professor's face was almost worthy of a picture. Harry nodded. Thank you for worrying about my future, though, Madam Umbridge. He smiled at her, a grin that never reached further than his mouth, nor did anything to hide the slightly mocking tone in his voice. Excuse me, I really need to get changed. So do I, Dora said with a smirk at the bitch. I mean, I smell from all that flying. Have a great evening, Madam Umbridge. She brushed past the woman, ignoring the raised hackles sent in her direction. As the door to the showers banged closed, Dora leaned back against the wood and hung her head. She could hear the other women already in the shower, so she felt secure enough to let go to a small degree. Umbridge was frustrated, sure, but this wasn't what Dora had been hoping for. The woman was still trying to pull people into her special detentions, and there was only so long that the other heads of houses would be able to stall her. She wasn't pulling her hair out, and she seemed to be just as determined as ever to trap Harry somehow. They'd have to start ramping up their efforts soon. Or, Dora scowled, no ors. Time could be changed. It could. She'd already changed things. Harry wasn't getting scarred. McGonagall, Sprout, and Flitwick were shielding their students. She was on the Quidditch team. Ron was sort of growing up. Time could be changed. The bad future was not a fixed point. This was going to work. She was going to save them.